Millions of people were watching her life. Every post, every video, every smile. It looked like freedom. A young couple traveling across the country in a van, documenting everything. But behind those videos, behind the carefully framed moments, something was already breaking. And by the time the world realized it, she was gone. Gabby Petito wasn't famous in the traditional sense. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't someone the world had been watching for years. But she was becoming something else. A travel creator. Someone trying to build a life online, one post at a time. The kind of life that looks simple from the outside, but takes constant effort to maintain. In 2021, she set out on a road trip across the United States with her fiancé, Brian Laundrie. They had a van, a camera, and a plan. The idea was clear: document everything, capture the journey, turn moments into content, build something people could follow. And for a while, it worked. Their social media showed open roads, quiet campsites, sunsets that stretched across the horizon. The kind of visuals that make people stop scrolling for a second longer than usual. The kind that makes people think, this is what freedom looks like. Two people traveling together. No office, no routine, just movement. And if you were watching from the outside, there was nothing about it that seemed wrong. But what people show is rarely everything, because a camera only captures what it's pointed at, and what it leaves out can matter more. In August 2021, something happened that disrupted the image. Police in Utah responded to a disturbance involving Gabby and Brian. What they recorded on body cam footage would later become one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in the entire case. Gabby is visibly distressed. She's crying, struggling to explain what happened, trying to take responsibility for things that don't fully make sense. Brian, on the other hand, appears calm. He talks clearly, answers questions, maintains composure. And at first glance, it doesn't look like a crime. It looks like a disagreement, something couples go through, something that happens and then passes. But if you look longer, if you sit with it, you start noticing something else. The imbalance. The way one person is overwhelmed while the other isn't. The way the situation feels controlled. At the time, no one could fully define what they were seeing. But later, that moment would be revisited again and again. Not because of what it proved, but because of what it suggested. After that incident, the trip continued. At least, that's what it looked like. Photos were still being posted, locations still shared. But then, without warning, it stopped. No new updates, no new videos. At first, it didn't raise alarms. Travel accounts go quiet all the time. People disconnect, they take breaks. But days turned into more than that. And then came the detail that shifted everything. Brian Laundrie returned home to Florida. Gabby didn't. There was no clear explanation, no statement, no visible concern from him that matched what people expected. And when her family tried to reach him, there was nothing. No answers, just silence. And that silence began to feel heavier with each passing day. Gabby Petito was reported missing, and this is where the case changed completely. Because it didn't stay a local investigation, it became something much larger. Social media took over. People started going through everything: her posts, her captions, the timeline of their trip. Small details that once meant nothing suddenly became important. People weren't just watching anymore, they were analyzing, trying to understand what had happened, not from official reports, but from fragments of a life that had been shared online. And then, something unexpected happened. A video surfaced, dash cam footage from another traveler. At first, it looked like nothing, just a road, a passing moment. But then someone noticed a van, parked. still, in a remote area in Wyoming. It matched Gabby's. That one piece of footage changed the direction of the search. Authorities focused on the area shown in the video. Search teams moved in, and soon after, they found her. Gabby Petito was no longer missing. She had been killed. The story that people had been following as a journey had become something else entirely, a crime. And for a moment, everything stopped feeling distant, because this wasn't just a headline anymore. It was someone people had watched, someone whose life had been visible right up until it wasn't. At that point, the focus turned fully to Brian Laundrie, but he wasn't there. He had disappeared. Now the investigation changed again, from finding Gabby to finding him. Search teams expanded. Law enforcement moved through large areas, trying to track someone who no longer wanted to be found. Days passed, then weeks. Public attention didn't fade, it intensified. Because now there were two questions. What happened to Gabby, and where was Brian? Eventually, the search came to an end. In a nature reserve in Florida, investigators found remains. They belonged to Brian Laundrie. Nearby, they recovered a notebook. Inside it, he admitted to killing Gabby. There was no trial, no courtroom, no cross-examination, just a written confession, and a case that in many ways closed without the kind of answers people expect. There wasn't a complex plan behind this, no financial gain, no long-term strategy. What investigators pointed toward was something more common and more dangerous, a relationship that became unstable, control, tension that built over time. Moments that didn't seem extreme on their own, but added together created something else. And when that tension finally broke, it didn't break halfway. It ended everything. This case stayed with people for a reason, not just because of what happened, but because of how it looked before it happened. A life that seemed perfect, carefully framed, shared in a way that made it feel real. And yet, behind that version of reality, something else was unfolding, something that didn't make it into the videos. Gabby Petito's story isn't just about a crime, it's about the gap between what we see and what's actually there, and how sometimes when that gap becomes visible, it's already too late.